This is the Watchmen Episode 3 feedback on TV Podcast Industries. Welcome back, fellow watchers, to our third bulletin of our Atomic Watchers. This is the feedback episode for episode 3 of the Watchmen series. I am one of your hosts, John.
Is it getting catchy yet, do you think? I'm the other host, Derek, for this episode. Is the third bulletin of our Atomic Watchers catchy yet, John, do you think?
Probably not, but it does sound nice and sciencey.
It does. I like it. Yeah.
Very sciencey.
Yeah, just us this time. Chris unfortunately can't join us for this episode. We're going to have a little challenge.
Wasn't he killed by space junk, I think?
he might have been killed.
Or seriously injured, I think. But he's making a full recovery.
He will be back, definitely. He will be back. We're going to have a weird couple of episodes over the next couple of weeks. Myself and John are moving from Switzerland back to Ireland. We've done one move already, and then we're going back over, and then we're going to swap places. So not sure exactly who's going to be on the next couple of episodes. I think I'm on all of them. I think John might be on one, and I think Chris might be on the other. But I'm not sure exactly who's on the next couple of episodes with me. And as you may notice, in the back of my throat, I've got a terrible cold right now. So John's going to take a lot of the heavy lifting or heavy duty work with his voice today for this episode, if that's all right. I will chip in with things that I'd like to say, obviously, as always. But please forgive my little cold. That's just from driving for, 16 hours, I think, over the course of 2 days?
Absolutely. So, yeah. But yes, fellow watchers, it will get a little wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey over the next week as we make our move. But that's all good for a series such as Watchmen, which is all about time. And moving from Switzerland to Ireland, of course.
It's not really about that at all.
No.
But it's about lots and lots of other things, and we have some great feedback in for our episode. But first off, before we kick into it, we do want to say a huge thank you to our first Patreon supporters.
Yes, Claire Payne and Ken Hugh. Thank you so much for supporting us over on Patreon. It's really appreciated, and many, many thanks indeed. This will really help to support the podcast through our website and through the editing of the podcast. Yeah, really, thank you so much for supporting us. It's really appreciated.
Yeah, we've started off with Patreon. We just simply have an area there where you can give $1 or more just to support the podcast. We have no additional tiers right now. We will get into those in the future. Really, the reason why is because a lot of people actually complain that we put out too many podcasts so they can't keep up. So we're not going to give any extra podcasts at the moment for supporting us on Patreon. When we do that, it's most likely going to be to continue our podcasting in between shows that are out there. What we find is that we do, 9 or 10 episode shows, and then we have a gap of about 3 or 4 months between the next 9 or 10 episode show. So John has some great ideas of shows that he wants to cover. Chris has some great ideas of shows he wants to cover, and I have some ideas of other shows that I want to cover as well. Some of them will be things that have already gone by in the past, but will be related to things that we're covering in the future. And we're coming up with plans as to what we're going to cover in the future. So if you want to let us know things that you're interested in seeing us or hearing us talk about, contact us, email us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries. Support us over on Patreon. Send us a message over there, the things that you might be interested in us covering in the future. But every piece of support that we get during this time anyway will go towards the running costs of the podcast so that we can deliver more stuff that you might be interested in times when we are a little more fallow in our podcasts.
Yes, absolutely. So if you'd like to support what we do, you can go through to patreon.com and search TV Podcast Industries. Yep. But of course, as well, you can support us in many other ways by sharing the podcast, discussing with friends, rating us, and leaving a review over on your favorite podcast catcher. So absolutely, thank you so much for everyone's support. It is really very much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, thanks very much to Claire and Ken for your support. Really good of you. One thing we wanted to point out, because we mentioned it on the main episode for episode 3, we said we'd watch the final episode when it came out on TV just to check and see what it looked like at the end of the episode. It was slightly clearer, I think, than the one that we saw in the preview.
Definitely.
But still a star. It does go by very quickly at the end of the episode. It still looks like a star, but could also be a brightly coloured engine of a ship that Laurie did know. So nothing more definitive, really, I suppose, than what we saw in the original version that we saw. Nothing more definitive than the final version. It's still kind of open to interpretation, and come back next week and find out kind of idea. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. But certainly, it's interesting to think that maybe in that moment, Laurie thought that Dr. Manhattan had tried to drop a car on her.
Well, exactly. Or he's listening to her and went, here you go, here's a car that you can drive home with. Oh, I dropped it a little bit too hard.
Here's my joke, exactly. Not very funny, Dr. Manhattan, not very funny.
And one other thing we noticed when we watched the episode again for when it went out live, in our podcast, we didn't really talk about the actual joke that Laurie tells. And if you're not a comic book reader, you may not really realize who she's talking about. I think some people will get it. And obviously the poster that's in the background gives a little bit more context to the actual joke that she's telling. But as a comic book reader, what she's telling throughout the story, I suppose, is her history with the Minutemen, with the Watchmen, in the comic books, I suppose. And that's kind of what makes it funny. But I did want to point out, I suppose, what each person that she's speaking about is, if that makes sense. Because I know some of our listeners, our fellow watchers, are looking to us as people who've read the comic books to kind of explain some of the things that they don't understand. And I think episode 3 is the first one that really stands out. And if you've not read the comic book, these are characters you don't know, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think first off, we have Night Owl Mark II, Dan Dreiberg, who, you know, was actually a really kind of gentle, nice guy until he donned on the suit, where he kind of stays nice, because he didn't kill anyone, and he certainly helped to save the world, but he had a relationship with Laurie Blake. So, you know, a really interesting situation there between the two.
Yeah, and he was also the kind of superhero partner of Rorschach. So he was the one that was kind of trying to keep Rorschach in check, trying to make sure that Rorschach didn't kill anybody around him. So,
yeah, or eat all his beans.
Yeah, it was almost like, I suppose, Captain America being paired up with the Punisher sometimes, where you kind of have Dan Dreiberg in this belief that he's the great superhero, and you have Rorschach going out there going, I'm going to kill every villain around there, or comedians sometimes going out and killing every villain that's out there. You know, Dan Dreiberg was the one that was kind of centered. So in the joke, you have the first guy dressed up as a bird standing in front of heaven saying, I didn't kill anyone, and God's sending him to hell because he didn't sacrifice enough. So that's the Night Owl one. The second one that goes up to heaven and is sent to hell by God in the joke is Ozymandias, who dropped the squid on New York, killing millions. And God said, well, you shouldn't have killed millions, and sends him off to his own hell. What we know from some of the background material, we know Ozymandias, we see him in the episode, we see Adrian Veidt in his own hell. We know that Night Owl is also in the custody of the government. We've read that from some of the other supplemental materials. So he's also in his own hell as well. So she is referencing things that we do know about these characters as well. So I think it's quite cool.
Then hero number 3 in the joke is Dr. Manhattan, or John Osterman, who was Laurie's former long-term boyfriend before she hooked up with Night Owl Mark II, and effectively who gave up on the world, who isolated himself on Mars, and yes, was fairly remote in all of this. And you know, he has that classic line where he says, alive or dead, the human body has the same number of atoms. So yes, very, very objective and apart from fairly highfalutin from the rest of society, and is very much, you know, science. Hence, Dr. Manhattan has the atom symbol. You know, I think as well, he has that moment where he says, if I am to choose a symbol, it is one that I believe in, and he draws the atom symbol. So he's very sciencey in this.
And I think the truth of it, as she says, is he's a god. And the point is that even though he is a god, he's not like the god that people project in certain faiths. He's a god that is going, I see the entirety of the universe, I see the entirety of time, and people are insignificant in that. And that's where the coldness comes across, and that's where the problem that Laurie come across. And when he's standing in front of God, effectively, God goes, well, you're wrong in this. You know, you should care more, kind of thing. And then finally, just Laurie reveals her own role in the joke. She says, I was just a woman that you didn't see coming. Kind of a commentary on how she's treated in the comic books. If you heard the official podcast, the interview with Damon Lindelof, where he talks about Laurie and how she was just a woman in the comic books almost. She was in the background, and she was only there because they needed to say something about Dan Dreiberg, or they needed to say something about the Watchmen. So they rolled out Laurie, who was affected by the comedian and Silk Spectre. She was a character that was affected by everybody around her and didn't have much of her own motivation, almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think she was constantly in the shadow of her mother's achievements, who was kind of the first Silk Spectre. Certainly from the comic, that's the storyline of her, is that she's kind of put down and put in the shadows by her mother, who's reliving her own glory days and the amount of attention that she got. And then there is this revelation where she understands that the comedian is her father. And ultimately then we're seeing her now taking on her father's name as Laurie Blake. Yes.
And there is a reference that she took on the role as the comedian during the period between the comics and now, that she did go out and took guns and went out and lived a life as the comedian as well. So she's saying that you didn't even see me coming, and she's the one that kills God is the joke, effectively.
Yeah,
so
and then
I do like that.
Yeah, and then finally, she does reference the fifth member, Rorschach, with a very tight synopsis here, which is good joke, roll on snare drums, curtains. Effectively, his whole through line probably in the original Watchmen comics, where he ends up being killed at the hands of Dr. Manhattan, hence the curtains at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he does actually say that line within the comic as well. It's one of his well-known ones. I think it appears on T-shirts with the Rorschach face mask as well. So one of those signature lines from Rorschach.
Yeah, exactly. Let us get on to our feedback. Our first email is from Steve Brown, who sent us some audio feedback.
Hey guys, it's Steve, and this is for Watchmen Episode 3. This is my, my first watch of it. I'm kind of sending you guys my first initial takes. So, love seeing Laurie Blake here and seeing that she assumed her father's last name after the events of the comic book. So that was really cool. I don't know if you guys picked up on it, but I'm a huge X-Files fan, so it was really cool to see her eating the sunflower seeds as a callback to Fox Mulder. If you watch the X-Files, he was a big, that was one thing that he had throughout the series. He would eat sunflower seeds all the time. And then, of course, I'm sure you guys are going to already mention it, but the Rorschach quote at the end when she finishes giving her joke, his joke was the Pagliacci, the clown joke in the comic book. But, she's telling her joke about the brick and everything. And, but that's exactly what he says there, the roll snare drum, curtains, good joke. I thought that was great that she had that, kind of in her to put out. So, can't wait to watch this again and, then, get some more thoughts on it and, hear y'all's questions for this week. Talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, there for your hot takes. Certainly big X-Files fan here as well. And I miss the sunflower seeds and her picking out one of the husks from her mouth. But, certainly I do remember Mulder, liking to just sit back and eat, his sunflower seeds, as Scully was indicating that it wasn't scientifically possible, what he was suggesting.
That is definitely a phrase you say often.
It is. Maybe even, that is quite a good phrase for the Watchmen, that some of these things maybe aren't scientifically possible.
They might be, though.
But they might be, or theoretically possible. Yes, possibly.
That's really good. I didn't actually notice it because I'm not a big X-Files fan, sadly. I'm really sorry. It's one of the shows I just didn't catch. It was just how it laid out. John has tried to show me a bunch of episodes and I've enjoyed every one I've watched. But it does make sense of that scene where Laurie picks a sunflower seed out of her teeth when looking into Looking Glass's mask for the first time. It was a really funny scene, whether you knew the reference or not, but I love that she uses his face as a mirror.
Definitely. And also nice, call out on the Pagliacci joke, because I just read it as a synopsis of Rorschach's kind of life, which I suppose it still is, in that he does reference, the clown, a lot. But I took curtains to be his death at the hands of Dr. Manhattan, and not so much the curtain coming down on, Pagliacci. Or maybe I've just completely misinterpreted the whole thing, of course. But I mean, good call and good to know.
The Pagliacci joke is basically a man goes into a therapist and says, "I'm really depressed," and the guy goes, "You should go and see the clown that's coming into town this week, Pagliacci," and he reveals that he's Pagliacci. It's the thing that made Rorschach laugh, a simple joke that made him laugh, and he's kind of referencing he doesn't really get jokes very often, so he's a very serious kind of character. But you are right. It's an overall as you say, an overall statement about Watchmen, the book as well. So very cool. Thanks so much, Steve. Always sending your feedback to us.
Yeah,
Love
absolutely.
Especially because they're your initial thoughts, and then at the end of the week you go and record your own podcast about it. That's quite good fun to have your initial thoughts after you've seen the episode. Let's go on to some more email. Jimbo, come back with an email.
Yeah, Jimbo says, "Gentlemen, I only managed to watch episode 3 late on Tuesday, so I have not been able to listen to your review yet to get this to you in time, but I'm hoping you enjoyed this one as much as I did. Mm-hmm. After the first 2 solid episodes, I really thought this took things to another level. Witty dialogue, dark humor, outrageous action sequences, and some fantastic new characters in Laurie and Petey. This was everything I was hoping for in this series. Laurie in particular was an excellent addition to the cast. Mm-hmm. At first I wondered if they would play down her history within the show other than to those familiar with the comics, but the fact her identity seems to be reasonably well known actually makes it even more interesting, as something of a vigilante hunter. The Batman-style bank opening with a twist was great fun, and her chemistry with Angela was perfect. I really hope we get to see them kick some ass together in future. Maybe she will even end up putting on her old costume in future, perhaps in a showdown with Ozzy wearing his. And what about that secret briefcase? Absolutely. It's certainly full of surprises, that briefcase. On a related note, I could happily watch a whole episode of just Jeremy Irons and his team chewing the scenery around his mansion. Mm-hmm. I was wondering who that gamekeeper was, and generally, where on earth, or perhaps not, are they living? Tonally, the writing of this episode did feel a bit lighter than before, so I will be keen to hear your notes on this and who was involved this time. Mm-hmm. As always, the music was great, although that Romeo and Juliet theme in Adrian's scene will always make me think about The Apprentice. The camera work was also high quality, with so many great background touches, and that transition between the FBI projector and the sun on the jet being a highlight, as well as the shot of Laurie seen through Angela's goggles in the cemetery. So much to talk about here, but so little time. I'll have to leave it there. I will comfortably give this one a 5 out of 5, and looking forward to even more next week. All the best, Jimbo. P.S. Glad you enjoyed the tomatoes. Yes, thank you so much, Jimbo. Yes, the tomatoes were lovely.
I do love that you're writing that letter as Adrian Veidt as well, and that's really good fun. Yeah, the episode was written by Lila Bayok, who worked on The Leftovers with Damon Lindelof. The two of them wrote this episode together. Damon Lindelof seems to be involved in every episode. He is the showrunner of the show, but he's very, very involved in every episode of the show. So the two of them working together, if you've seen The Leftovers, you know how quality her work is. She can really get that tone of very weird comedy and a bit of dark humor, and some of the characterizations in here I think are the best the season has had so far.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, that shot through Angela's goggles in the cemetery was really, really nicely done for sure. I do think though, I'm sure that they will come together at some point, these two, probably to work together, but I'm really enjoying the more antagonistic side of this meet and greet, I suppose, between the two leading ladies with Angela and Laurie. It's just really nice to hear that back and forth, kind of snidey banter between the two of them. I'm really enjoying that. Also, I'm thinking, a showdown with Ozzy, would be interesting, because I still am not sure whether she would be able to deal with him, but I just don't know. I always just remember, maybe this is just bias from having watched Zack Snyder's film, but just that whole idea that he seems so much stronger than any of the other Watchmen other than Dr. Manhattan, but nonetheless she really has a serious grudge to bear with him, because he obviously killed her father, as she now knows. So also, the gamekeeper in the land of Jeremy Irons' existence, wherever that may be, we may have a little bit more of a clue as to who this might be, and it could actually just be one of the clones, or maybe the original Mr. Phillips, with a tash and really supporting that Zorro look, or should I say the Lone Ranger look. I think it feels like a connection to Hooded Justice and his inspiration for becoming the vigilante.
Right. Very good. Yeah. It's really interesting, because I wonder if they just thought after watching the episode we didn't get it in the audience enough. So HBO and Sky Atlantic in the UK both have that image of the actor who plays Mr. Phillips, very clearly shown on the back of the horse with the moustache. Like, it's very clear that it's him in that role. And I wondered, did they just kind of think everybody would just assume that's who it was, and everybody went, is that Dr. Manhattan? Because a moustache and a hat and glasses all make a character look very different if you only see them on screen for a couple of seconds. But it's pretty clear that it's Mr. Phillips. It may just be another clone of Mr. Phillips who runs the borders, I suppose. One thing I would like to see, and that's something that came from your email, Jimbo. You know what costume I really would want to see? Not Laurie trying to fit back into the Silk Spectre costume, because the whole joke of that is that she once again is completely sexualized as a character in the 80s when she wants to become a superhero like the other guys. She's a very different person now. I would love to see them create her comedian costume. When she took on the role of the comedian and ran around with guns as a vigilante, I'd love to see if she put on that costume versus Ozzy, because we've already seen a bullet to the head from this character. You know, she's willing to instantly kill people, right? So will she go toe to toe with Ozymandias, or will she just put a bullet between his eyes the minute she sees him? And then she goes, right, you killed my dad, revenge is sweet, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a great showdown for sure. Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Jimbo, for the feedback there. Over on Facebook, Cathal Fitzgerald says, it's 3 for 3 now in terms of strong episodes of Watchmen. There is so much to like, but let's focus on the writing for a moment. This is a great example of a weaving storyline with ropes and threads all at the same time. We have the introduction of a new character, so well played, by the way, and her storyline, a thick rope of story. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the fine threads of the Watchmen's backstory are delicately and expertly spun using Laurie's joke on the phone to Mars. All the while, the story of the Lord of the Manor, the tactics of the 7th Cavalry, the murder mystery, and introduction of doubt about Sister Knight's actions, all of this is expertly developed. It's serialized TV writing and production at its best. Throw in a dub reggae banger of a tune, it's just a brilliant watch and listen.
I'm gone straight into outer space.
Yes, thank you so much, Cathal. Yeah, this was a great episode for me. I think it just had so much intrigue, and as you say, thick lines of story, fine threads of backstory, just nicely brought together here. And for me, certainly Sister Knight and her interaction with Laurie Blake was just phenomenal. I thought it was really, really good. And to have the audience doubting the motives around Sister Knight by the end, and also Laurie being very perceptive about how things just don't add up in Tulsa at the moment with respect to Judd Crawford's death and murder is really, really good.
She really does feel like the Columbo character. Just one more thing that I noticed, you know, this moment where she does throw that idea of possibly Angela Barr is an unreliable narrator, the person that we've followed for the first 2 episodes, because we're all on Laurie's side. If you've read the comic books, you're absolutely on her side. You believe that she's the one that's searching for truth and justice, and maybe Angela isn't. So, really, really cool idea to bring her in here. Thanks so much for that, Cathal. Richard Blaze also sent some feedback in over on our Facebook page. Richard, so good to hear from you again. Richard used to listen to us on the Gotham TV podcast as well. So, great to hear your thoughts. It's been a while. As he says himself, it's been quite a while, says Richard. Stupid work, but managed to make time for this triumph of TV viewing. For me, episode 3 is the strongest episode yet, and that's not saying the others have been bad. Just thought this one excelled in expanding the world outside of Tulsa. Like most, I have so many theories, but also far more questions, and I think if only after 3 episodes of the series is generating this much conversation from everyone and everywhere, where will it all be at the end? I cannot wait to find out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a weavy, wimey, wobbly thing, this Watchmen series. Thanks, Richard, so much for the feedback.
Absolutely. You know, one of those shows that's on TV and you go, after people have seen the full series, then suddenly all these podcasts and all these theory websites and all this stuff all pop up afterwards. I already feel this is happening. I think loads of people seem to know that was coming. There's at least 30 or 40 major publications who are doing their own podcasts about it, or video casts about the show already with their theories and their Easter eggs that are coming up. And it's paying off really well.
Definitely.
In the corners of every single scene, there's stuff that's happening, going on, referencing that we're not picking up.
No, and you just can't. I mean, I think this is the great thing as well, is there are so many questions, but they are actually giving us answers as well. It's just not necessarily the answer that we want to get to, or those answers just give us more questions and you're still trying to figure out. And there's so much information to process as a viewer. It's really great TV for just getting the gray matter to fire about what is going on. And of course, all these theories are just fantastically good fun because, okay, they may not play out, but it's just so rewarding to be thinking of that theory and to then find out whether it's right or wrong. And of course, theories in science are tested. So this kind of, I think marries quite nicely with this Watchmen series, which has at its center time, physics, all this kind of these scientific elements. So, yes, a lot of theories will be disproved and others will continue to have existence until they are disproved, until we have the final theory that is proven with this show. So, yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Richard.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. I can't believe you didn't take your opportunity to say the truth is out there, Jill.
The truth is out there. Yes. I should. I
know, as a massive X-Files fan, you went through 9 seasons waiting for the aliens to arrive or waiting for that big answer to your question from the beginning of the show. As a Lost fan as well, going through 5 seasons of the show looking for the answers to the questions that you had at the beginning. I can totally take it. I can totally take going through each episode as long as they're of this quality with this great writing and that awesome cast in here. If I don't get answers in each episode, I'm fine. I can live out for the rest of the season and go on with these characters because they're really, really good and really enjoyable to watch.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Richard, for the feedback. And finally, for feedback, we have a great cryptic 5-star review on Apple Podcasts from Al Shalant, whose review says, spacesuit fabric made of clone skin leather. Put Mr. Phillips in the cellar with the rest. We'll put him to good use. Yes, that's rather interesting, the idea that the spacesuit potentially could be made from the skin or, dare I say it, hide of the clones. I actually thought it was from the buffalo.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether, because we get that moment where the Lord of the Manor, Jeremy Irons, does say we need to make it thicker. So maybe he is going to put them to use in the end. But certainly that is both a fascinating and macabre idea put into our review there on Apple Podcasts. So thank you, Al Shalant, for that mystic, cryptic review. Really good.
And thanks so much for the 5-star review. Always nice to get 5-star reviews over on Apple Podcasts. On to our next regular piece of the podcast, because hbo.com/PTpedia has been updated with 3 new documents for this week. Some really interesting ones here. First up, probably my favorite of the 3 documents, because it's another angry memo from Special Agent Dale Petey. He's got his full title in this memo. Special Agent Dale Petey, a reference to Special Agent Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks, which I'm sure I've mentioned before in the past, but I like that we have Special Agent Dale Petey paired up with possibly their X-Files representative here, Laurie Blake. Quite cool. He's talking about American Hero Story, the TV show, and his title for his memo is based on unfactual events. Now, interestingly, if you read it as you would read the website, you probably read this as kind of a commentator on a TV show. We're commentators on TV shows, so this is probably aimed at people like us, who go on the internet and tell you whether they like or don't like a TV show and tell you all the things they don't like about it. But I feel like it's also aimed at a very specific group of people that comment on TV shows like ourselves, who get annoyed that people have taken license with things they love and things they like.
Yes, maybe. Yeah, definitely.
In this case, so first off, a couple of little things that I pulled out from it. Petey's seen the first 2 episodes of American Hero Story Minutemen, which is the TV show that's in the Watchmen TV show. He's very annoyed at the inaccuracies in the portrayal of the characters, and particularly annoyed at the fact that some people might suffer because of the drama presented. This was released after the 3rd episode of Watchmen on TV, and he's talking about the fact that he's seen the first 2 episodes and doesn't like them, which I just think is probably a little reference in there. Another thing he references, just to mention, in the comic book series itself, Under the Hood was a memoir written by the first Night Owl, a character called Hollis Mason in the comic books. It's often quoted in there. Agent Petey in this memo takes a number of shots at how valid it was and how much Hollis Mason might be changing just to suit his own ideals. He mentions again that Hooded Justice was said to be in a same-sex relationship, but that Hollis Mason called it a deviant relationship because of his own issues, which I think is interesting. I mentioned before that one of the reasons I don't think that Will is Hooded Justice is because he was in that same-sex relationship and Angela is supposed to be his granddaughter. So there are many ways that, of course, he could have a granddaughter, but it was such a specific thing and one of the only things we knew about Hooded Justice, or at least we thought we did, but he's casting kind of this doubt on whether anything that's said in the novel is just made to titillate or made to sell books by Hollis Mason.
Yeah, maybe a bit of jealousy there from Hollis Mason. Just that Hooded Justice has more of a profile than he did, and he felt somewhat in the background. Yeah,
exactly. Also mentioned in there by PT, he says the comedian is treated as the hero of the show. And he mentions that everyone that comedian saved in Vietnam had to be treated for some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder because of the way they were saved by the very violent comedian. And they say also that he was effectively in the show, they explain away the fact that he is a rapist because of the toxic masculinity that he was surrounded by all the other members of the Minutemen. So they're kind of giving him an excuse for being the person that he is, which, as we know from Petey, he's very defensive of Laurie and very defensive of Sally Jupiter in his historical learnings, I suppose. So he doesn't like the idea at all of any kind of out being given to comedian.
No, absolutely. Dare I say it, I think the comedian is not someone that he got on with. And maybe, who knows, that Hollis Mason may have looked to have a hookup with the Silk Spectre, these first iterations of the character in the way that the Mark IIs did, so to speak. Yeah.
They're definitely very good friends, and I know what you see is that they've definitely got a good friendship between the two of them.
Yeah.
What Petey points out here is that Hollis Mason died a bachelor and was never known to have had a relationship. It's kind of suggested in the book that he was in love with Sally Jupiter, and because they never got together, he never met anybody. But he's insinuating actually he could be a person that wanted a same-sex relationship but wasn't able to come out during his time. So this is all PT speculation again. Finally, he does mention about Sally Jupiter being treated sympathetically because of kind of selling herself to the audience. And they do comment on internet commentators. I'm sure this is their comment, where he ends his memo with a wonderfully written line where he says, "I have suffered through 2 episodes of this dreck. I'm not looking forward to the 3rd, but I will watch, for if no one stands up for history, then why do they write it in the first place?" Love it, this historical learning from Agent Petey going, well, this is what I learned from history.
Yeah, no, it's a really good memo. I love the sly humour in it, and directed outwards maybe as well. I think that's really good.
Directed from the show, possibly.
Yeah,
I'd love
absolutely.
to know who's writing these. Really, really good fun.
Another one is "Honor is like a hawk. If you love it, set it free." An article in the New Frontiersman. This is written by Hector Godfrey. And at the end of the comic books, this is the editor who published Rorschach's journal for the whole world to see.
Yes.
And basically, it's shown in this article that he is a revolutionary supporting Nixon, and really shouting at the world for keeping the Robert Redford left-wing government, who just promoted John Grisham to the Supreme Court. So all these lovely, well-known names taking up roles in, the Supreme Court. But I suppose, anyone can get on that now. Is that right? I don't know.
It is genuinely taking stuff from today's press and turning it into, if it was a right-wing person shouting at a left-wing government. There's loads of stuff of why are so many snowflakes on the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
There's loads of stuff of impeach him, take him out, loads of references to how right-wing Hector Godfrey is. And similar to the comments about, a TV show being made on Hollis Mason's book because of his perspective and what he's teaching people. This is basically about Hector Godfrey and his perspective on the Rorschach book and how he published it to the world. And effectively, that's how we got the 7th Cavalry in this universe.
Yeah, I mean, I really like some of the small facts that can be taken from this article, like his take on the Rorschach journal, which led to the creation of the 7th Cavalry, where he kind of says, that he supports them, but believes they should stop the violent attacks and vote for Senator Keene in the next election instead, which is kind of interesting. Maybe some clue that the whole 7th Cavalry potential involvement in Judd Crawford's murder is some way to promote Senator Keene to office, or Senator Keene Jr. to office. And as well, we really get here that the Redfordations that we hear in the classroom in episode 1 is definitely an offensive term for the tax scheme that's been drawn up by the Redford administration to provide reparations for not only Tulsa, the Tulsa massacre or the Black Wall Street massacre, but anyone involved and their descendants in and around 50 different incidents of what they term certifiable atrocity perpetrated by structures or agents of white supremacy. And so there is this generous tax relief that is given as part of these reparations. So yeah, really some interesting aspects here in the New Frontiersman article.
Yeah, and I think what I like about it is because it's written from somebody who's so violently opposed to what's going on, it's interesting that you can still glean some facts from them. He's trying to say these things are all wrong, but you're actually going, oh, okay, so it's 50 different incidents that they've said, these particular attacks happened, and we as a government are saying we need to support these people and we need to give them some kind of break to say, now we can move on as a country because we're accepting what we did wrong in the past.
Definitely.
And this is angering the person that published Rorschach's journal, Rorschach being the straight-laced person that told the absolute truth of what happened in the original Watchmen comic book, but the way it went out into the world was through the mouthpiece of someone that doesn't believe in the ideals, effectively. So very interesting that we have this in there. The final item that's in this week's Petepedia is a letter, which is interesting, a letter from Senator Keene Sr. to Judd Crawford's grandfather. Very interesting because, weirdly, it does explain why the name on the painting that we saw in episode 2 is different to the real name that we saw on the internet, right?
Yeah.
So effectively, he's given the painting Martial Feats of Comanche Horsemanship to Crawford grandfather. The original painting was called Comanche Feats of Martial Horsemanship, and this is a replica done by the original artist, which is true to life. He did multiples of his own work, renamed them slightly, and then sold them on to make money for himself, effectively. So just a little reference in there, but it's just interesting. When we Google searched it, we didn't see that little bit of history in there. The intent of the letter is to appoint Crawford, grandfather Crawford, as the leader of a group called the Archaeans, which is from ancient Greece, the Achaeans, I think is the pronunciation, or Asians, actually, come to think of it, if my ancient Greek is up to scratch, like Asians would be the way you'd say
your
it.
ancient Greek is definitely better than my ancient Greek.
I do remember reading Homer the Odyssey, and I remember reading the group of Asians in there, mentioned a bunch of times as members from Greek mythology, yeah. But he signs off the letter with 4 letters, and the name of this particular article on Petepedia is called The 4 Letters, so that's obviously why it's important. It's 4 letters at the end, an acronym saying AKIA, and then signed by Keene. And Reddit tells us this is a Klansman I am, is what the AKIA is, that he signs, and then signed by Keene. And Keene is effectively saying to Crawford, you're now the new leader of the clan by handing over this painting to him. And when you get to the next leader, you give him this story and you give him the painting to show that he's the new leader. So that begs the question, was Judd Crawford the new leader because the painting is hanging up in his home that we see when Angela leaves after finding the clan outfit with the sheriff's badge on it?
Yeah.
Or is, as referenced from Looking Glass, is he just holding on to the stuff because his father was the leader of the clan in the past, and this is a painting that was handed down to Judd Crawford, and that whole old idea is gone? I don't know.
That's fascinating. That is fascinating. And I suppose that will come out in hopefully future episodes of Watchmen when we understand more about why the KKK robes were hanging up in the secret closet in the Crawford's home. Exactly,
huh? Really good articles on Petepedia this week, and really in depth, like really detailed.
Yeah, really enjoying the PTpedia stuff actually, and it really does complement the series. So, our advice is definitely check them out.
Yeah.
It really adds some additional layers to get you thinking about some of those theories that may or may not come true.
Yeah, absolutely. Other things to check out this week. We're not going to go too in depth into them because we're running a little bit long. Cos PTPD was so in depth, I suppose. The first volume of the score from Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor came out this week. Check it out. It's really, really good. If you get the vinyl copy of it, they do actually have even more information in the background world of the Watchmen. The actual volume is called The Book of Rorschach, and it's supposed to be from a band from the 90s that recorded this album and re-released it now. And they have liner notes mentioning who the band are and has, reviews from the time and that kind of stuff, and so much more information again. Really in depth. There's two more volumes to come as well, so really looking forward to those. Also, as we mentioned earlier on, the official Watchmen podcast came out this week. There's going to be 3 episodes of that. There are 3 interviews with Damon Lindelof about the show itself. The first one is a really good interview, just talking about how he came up with the idea and how he got to this place now. A couple of little Easter eggs about things that happened in the show. I think we talked about most of them on our podcast. I don't think there was anything specifically additional that they talked about on there that I can think of, but it's worth a listen. Damon Lindelof is so interesting to listen to.
Yeah, it is a great podcast with obviously the showrunner. So it's just good to hear it from, dare I say it, as we've been talking about feats of martial horsemanship of the Comanche. It's great to get it from the horse's mouth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's led by the showrunner of Chernobyl, who did a great podcast on the show Chernobyl. So check that out. It's available pretty much everywhere our podcast is available. So if you want some more in-depth discussion,
exactly,
go in there. And finally, there's one other article we're going to talk about here, but I'm not going to because it's very close to our pub quiz question for this week, and we'll give away the answer. Just for some of our listeners, for the pub quiz questions you've been sending in, your answers are right, and everybody seems really surprised when they're getting their answers right. So if you've sent them in already, almost every one of you has got your answers right. Okay? So that's a good indication of the kind of answers John is looking for from his questions. But I'm not going to give any out. We have a question each week in our feedback episodes. We'll have 8 questions, and by the end of the 8 episodes, we want everybody to send in all of the 8 questions right, and we'll choose a winner in our final episode for feedback.
Absolutely. Thank you, fellow pub quizzers, for all the answers. It's good to have this going. And of course, it's a good excuse to have a quick pint or maybe another tipple of your fancy whilst you send in the answers, just to make it feel like it is being done in a pub. We should actually do a pub quiz at some point. That would be quite cool.
Maybe for our 500th episode. That's not that long away, actually.
Yeah, we can organise a meet where we can all have a massive pub quiz on all things to do with, well, anything that we've covered. That would be really good. But
do you know, that would really work over on Get Vocal or something like that. If we could set up a video chat and have people in the room and answer a question, then click on their video to answer the question to us.
Absolutely. Really cool. And stipulation is that everyone must be drinking.
You can't force people to drink. You can see how long you've lived in Ireland.
But any drink, not necessarily alcoholic. And of course, no mobile phones allowed.
Very good, John.
Yes,
very good.
Exactly. So on to our episode 3 question of the Watchmen Pub Quiz, fellow watchers. Yes, question 3. What does Agent Blake carry in the metal case that we see in this episode of the HBO Watchmen series?
Interesting.
Yes. Saucy and raunchy, dare I say it, this question.
Can we say there are 3 items in the case?
I think we can. A little hint. There are 3 items that you must provide in the answer. And no looking back at the episode, which I know we can't enforce at all.
I think we can allow them to look back at the episode.
I'm just being quiz master of this pub quiz.
Fellow watchers, you'll never know if you went back to the
exactly.
episode. Go back and watch it. We want as many right answers as possible.
Yes, because of course, this gives you the chance to win a Watchmen theme prize at the end of the full series of our coverage of Watchmen. Yes, we'll be providing the full set of answers to the pub quiz in our episode 9 feedback. And yes, looking forward to it. We're keeping note of all the respondents. And of course, remember, fellow watchers, you can send in the answers at any time on any of the questions that we cover. So the main thing is to get them in before our episode 9 feedback.
And if you want an easy way to find the questions, just go to the website at tvpodcastindustries.com, and you can find the questions in each of these feedback episodes. I have the questions written out there for you. Hopefully that might give a little clarity to one or two, just in case you're not sure of what the question was, not sure what the answer was. It should give it a little bit of clarity there as well.
Yes. So thank you again to everyone providing the feedback. Really nice to hear from you. And thank you so much to everyone who's listening to our coverage of the Watchmen series. It is for me to say that we will be back on Monday, the 11th of November with Watchmen Episode 4, which is, if you don't like my story, write your own. That is the episode title, by the way. I wasn't just simply reading out a statement.
Yep, really like that episode title. Really looking forward to sharing our thoughts on that episode as well. Share your thoughts. Email us at feedback@tvpodcastindustries with your thoughts about that episode once you've seen it. Our cutoff time, as always, is Wednesday, 2 minutes to midday, GMT, every Wednesday. And we love hearing your thoughts. We love discussing everything about the episodes. Once again, thank you so much to Claire Payne and Ken Hugh for their sponsorship over on Patreon. Pop on over to patreon.com/tvpodcastindustries if you want to throw us a couple of bucks to keep the podcast going as well. But of course, as John mentioned on the outset, if you want to share our podcast, that's also a great way to support us as podcasters. I'm really happy with how this podcast for Watchmen is going, actually, at the moment. It seems to be going quite well. Lots of brand new listeners popping in and commenting and following along with us, which is great.
Yeah, thanks so much, fellow watchers. It's just for me to say thank you so much for listening. As always, it is a pleasure. Remember, keep on watching, keep on listening to TV Podcast Industries.
Bye.
Bye.